With all of our pieces connected together and joined into a singular object, we're now ready to start the remeshing. The remeshing of our mesh is basically the process in which the computer is going to physically glue all of these discontiguous polygonal islands into one piece. So imagine that all of these individual shapes, so like this thing in here, is going to get melted and glued and welded together onto this central mass. This is a destructive edit. This is a point of no return. So make sure that you're real happy with the overall form and function of your sculpture before you get past this point. Now, that's not to say that you're not going to be able to change it going forward, but the larger idea is that this is going to fundamentally change your polygonal mesh. This is a great time to save out a new version of your project file. That way, you always have something to go back to if you really mess up or if you don't like the results of your remesh. I always try to keep an early version of my mesh that's got all of these separate discontiguous polygonal islands around inside of my project directory, just in case. It is helpful from time to time. Okay. Now, before we jump into the remeshing of all of our sculptures here, let's go into the sculpting tab and start looking at how this interface and how this entire layout is going to support our entire artistic process. Let's do it real fast. Of course, I've been chilling and hanging out in the modeling tab up until now, but if we go into the sculpting tab, here we go. Now you can see that our layout is just slightly different. There are some pretty big additions to this environment that are worth pointing out. This is its own separate environment. So if you look carefully here, the viewport shading properties have changed. In the modeling layout, I can go in, I can have that be wireframe or even that see-through. But the moment I go into my sculpting environment, all of those viewport properties don't travel with it. We have our own viewport properties, and that's a good thing. We want to be able to change our viewport properties to enhance the sculpting workflow. More on that a little bit later. But let's continue the tour here. The viewport's going to be looking a little different here. Of course, on the left-hand side of the screen, we have all of our sculpting tools. Now, there's a lot of them. This is one of the cool things about Blender. They really have invested heavily inside of the digital sculpting workflow in Blender, and it's quite good. I mean, it's excellent, actually, in my opinion. And we have a lot of tools. However, one of the things that you've already probably noticed is it's that crazy long list of tools inside the interface itself. If you hover your mouse over the boundary of the toolbar, I'm going to see if I can do it. It's real subtle, but right there on that gray bar that will allow you to go up and down, if you'd like, and this is how I prefer to work, you can put your cursor there and it turns into a little left-right arrow. Well, if you drag to the right, you can see that it goes from a single line into a double line. It slightly changes the order in which all the sculpting tools appear in the toolbar itself, but it compacts it a little bit. I don't like having that crazy long list. It just kind of doesn't work for me, but work however is most comfortable for you. Some people like having that extra screen real estate down there on the sides. It helps them out. I'm cool with that. That's very okay in a lot of sense. So these are going to be all of our sculpting tools, and there are a bunch of them. Everything from drawing tools to smoothing tools to moving tools. We have a whole bunch. I want you to spend some time really looking at how they've color-coded them, because I think this is quite brilliant. If you look carefully, some of the icons are blue, others are this orangey red, some are yellow, and then some are purple. What's the deal? Well, all these blue ones are additive sculpting brushes. The orange ones are kind of like smoothing. They're almost subtractive, if you will. They're going to push the mesh in versus pulling the mesh out. So that's another way of thinking of it. The blue pulls out, and the orange pushes in. The yellow one, these are kind of user control. This is where, like the grab, for example, we can physically grab sections and push and pull them whatever direction our cursor is facing. So the yellows are going to be more kind of user-centric in their operation. And the purple ones, those are kind of utilities, and we'll talk more about those kind of in a couple weeks when we really start to dive into the advanced functionality of the Blender sculpting engine. In addition to all of our tools over here on the left side of the screen, I also want to make sure that you guys are aware that we have a whole bunch of tools at the top side of our screen. And there are a bunch of them up there, so don't forget about them. Of course, naturally, the radius is going to be one that we're going to be working with a lot. The strength is something that we're going to be looking at from time to time. Really important, especially when talking about smoothing. More on that in a little bit. But also make sure that you spend some time and look at how, like the stroke, we'll talk about this, cursor, the fall off. There's just a lot of additional modifications that we can apply to the sculpting tools to get the result that we're after. The larger point being is, don't forget this area way up here at the top. There's a lot of good stuff up there that's really super important and conducive to the to our workflow here in Blender. And then last but certainly not least of the new things inside the sculpting interface is we have these options right here. And these are kind of some of the more important options inside the sculpting interface. These here will allow us to work in symmetry. I have an entire video in which we'll talk about how we can effectively use symmetry, but this is where we turn it on and off. The Dyntopo tools are quite good, and this is an interactive tessellation system for our models. More on that much later. On our second project, we're going to talk about how we can use the Dyntopo for us to very quickly flesh out a concept. And then, of course, the remeshing tools, which we're going to directly address here in a moment. This is where we go to find all of our remeshing. And this last one, this options, this is just some viewport display stuff that's helpful, but just be aware that there's some new things that are absolutely critical and unique to the sculpting workflow up here at the top. You're not going to see the Dyntopo and the remesh tools anywhere else in the sculpting environment. They appear in other areas. They appear in our toolbar over here on the right-hand side. But just keep that in mind. They have some great little shortcuts here up here at the top. Other than that, our toolbar is going to be almost identical, or excuse me, our properties tab is going to be almost identical to what we've been used to seeing in the modeling interface, as is our outliner. It still pretty much works the exact same way. Now, in the viewport here, I want to make a couple suggestions. Spend some time, figuring out if you want to work in perspective or an orthographic view. Get comfortable with working between these environments. Just know that it is a little bit different from the modeling environment that we've been working with before. Get comfortable. This is going to be your new home for the next few weeks, and I think once you start to claim residency of this home, you'll find that it's a wonderful environment to work.